Hello, and welcome to the Creative Director Reacts YouTube channel. I'm Brian, an executive creative director working in global advertising agencies. I'll be using my nearly 2 decades of experience to provide some insight and react to some of the best and worst ads ever made. With that said, let's react. Hello, creatives, and welcome back for episode 2 of my Creative Director Reacts series. Today I'm going to be watching and reacting to the Michael Phelps Under Armour ad, Rule Yourself. A little bit of backstory of this ad. This was created by the famous ad agency Droga 5 New York, probably considered one of the top 3 creative advertising agencies of its time. This ad was quite special in that it was done for the Olympics, but Under Armour was not actually main Olympic sponsor there. It was Nike. And so while Nike was doing this campaign called Find Your Greatness, which was all about finding the athlete within yourself, within everyday people, Under Armour wanted to do the opposite. And they wanted to really highlight top-level athletes and top-level athletic performance and celebrate it, but also take away some of that attention from Nike into Under Armour. Now, if you remember, at the time, Michael Phelps was obviously an undisputed swimming champion. He had won everything there was to win, but he had also had a lot of personal issues that were in the news. Second DUI, so struggling with some substance abuse. Mental health was a big problem. I think there was news about attempted suicide, and so he's going through all these things, right? And a lot of this kind of harkens back to this discussion that we are now having in 2024 about mental health and athletes and mental health. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about that. Simone, women's Olympic, basically champion of everything in women's Olympics, also has brought this to light. A lot of great athletes in the past have touched on mental health and mental health awareness amongst athletes in sports, but not a lot has been done. So this ad really was ahead of its time, in the sense it put Michael Phelps as sort of a real life story, his story, his comeback. He had retired because of injuries, because of mental health. He wasn't having fun. He wasn't into swimming. He's just kind of fallen out of it. And so he retired, but then, he bounced back and basically found his love for swimming again and wanted to prove all the critics wrong, and came back to compete once more in the Olympics, where I think he won 5 gold medals and 1 silver or something in the 6 competitions that he did. So basically swept the entire Olympics in his categories and proved everybody wrong. And so this story really talks about all of that in a very different way than the sort of high polished, perfect, professional athletes and stuff like that. And I think it really is quite raw, and the music itself is just a perfect track. It's The Last Goodbye by The Kills, and perfect choice. And once again, the choice of music is super important in this. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, but for now, let's react.
It's the last goodbye, I swear. I have no regrets, for the past is behind me. Tomorrow reminds me just where. Can't quite see the end. How can I rely on my heart if I break it with my own 2 hands? I heard all you said, don't say anything. It's the last goodbye, I swear.
Okay, So that's, I mean, that's a phenomenal ad, production wise, everything. Let's talk about the music first, right? I mentioned in the previous episode, music is so important, and literally creatives will spend hours, days, sometimes weeks, even in some cases they're rare, but in some cases we might even just shoot a lot of the film, and as we're in editing there might be a track that comes to mind that hits us. It's really strange how like there we have processes for everything as a creative, right? We have processes for start to finish and how we do things, why we do things the way we do. But for some reason, in a lot of cases, when it comes to music, things can change. You can be completely set. In some cases, have a complete TV commercial with a music track that you really like, and you're about to pull the trigger. You're negotiating music licenses, rights and all that stuff, and cost is in the budget already, and client likes it. But then there's just something that bothers you, right? You're watching it because as creatives, you watch this probably a thousand times throughout, right? We're constantly watching and watching and watching and watching, and there are times when you just get this feeling, where you're just like, there's something not right here, and I think when that right sort of strikes you, that the right music track hits you, it's so magical. And I imagine they had something like this where it took them a long time to find this music track, but when they did, you can imagine this TV commercial with no other track. And the other trick that a lot of times we use is that when we do pick out a music track, the lyrics themselves inform and tell the story. So instead of having a narration voice or a VO basically talking over the shots and talking, maybe there's a version of this that had Michael Phelps even narrating his own journey and him talking about, these different things in his journey, and maybe a poetic form or something like this, or a prose form. Maybe there was a version of that out there that they filmed and shot and stuff, but then found the perfect track and we're like, you know what, this is amazing. And the lyrics themselves already speak to the story that he's going through. Let's use that. And whenever possible, we want to do that, right? As creatives, we don't want to overcomplicate things. We don't want to add layers upon layers upon layers if we don't have to, if it doesn't lend itself to the creative, right? So if we can find a music track that not only is a great music track, has the right rhythm, has the right melodies, but also has lyrics that are very poignant and very, true to what we're trying to say, we want to use that track, and we may pay more for that if we have to, right? That's the other part of that, right? Interesting, the music track here, it's got a pulse to it, right? It's got a cyclic pulse to it, which is very much in rhythm to the swimming. So we start out in this, this long shot of this pool, right? Michael Phelps in this pool swimming, and essentially he's swimming in this dark pool, lit up. His lane is lit up. Most likely these guys are not swimming in the dark necessarily. Although I've heard stories of, ocean training and that, but still, it's done for artistic license, but there's a meaning behind it. We're highlighting his story, that single lane, that again, lending to itself a little bit of that melancholy feeling of just this single lane in the dark. Later on in the tagline, you'll see why that makes sense, but you're doing the slow pullback as he's just endlessly swimming. You don't see the end. He doesn't reach the end. He's just continually swimming in this cycle. Meanwhile, you've got the pulse, the rhythmic pulse of the song in the background, right? And then you basically, you have many shots of him essentially just training, and it seems like it's typical shots, but if you look at the color grading, if you look at the shots themselves, it's not super high polished. They try to keep it very real. They try to keep it very sort of in camera. I mean, obviously there was color grading, obviously there's lighting, but they want to keep it grounded, right? You don't see just super slick, this isn't like a super slick, high performance athletic ad that you would think a commercial ad. This is much more of a little of a mini documentary, right? A telling of a story of what he's going through. You have your gratuitous shots of him training, sleeping. I think it's quite interesting that they use things like crowd noises to bleed in through, coaches screaming in the background, bleeding through images. Here, it's a lot of macro shots too, right? Macro shots of the ice bath, the bruising. There's been a lot of media attention around his diet and how much he eats and how many calories that he needs. And again, no slick product shots. Obviously, he's wearing an Under Armour shirt here, but it's very quick. It's very, very brief. You're always continually flicking back to this moment. So essentially, this whole film, in real time, he's swimming, but as he's swimming, what's going through his head and what we, the audience, are seeing as a flashback moments to how he got there, which is essentially all these shots. You see the cryo chamber. You see him like looking in the off season at the pool, basically telling us that he is always thinking about swimming. It is always on his mind, even when he's not swimming, even when he's not training, he's thinking of swimming. He's obsessed with it. He's obsessed with all of that. There's been a lot of talk about cupping, and this is very, very common in Southeast Asia in particular. I've seen it myself. And basically what it is you heat up these glass cups, and basically what happens is there's a suction that happens with the hot air, and it pulls basically the blood to the surface, and it's supposed to improve circulation. There is no empirical, scientific, or medical, evidence, but a lot of people say that it makes them feel better. I don't know if that's just, the placebo effect or not, but I think what it does here, and the reason why it's here is because it's showing that Michael Phelps is willing to do and try anything as long as it works, right? Doesn't care that it leaves bruises all over his body. Doesn't care. He doesn't care what the media thinks about it, that he's being superstitious, or, doesn't care. Medical professionals are calling it out and say it's not, there's no empirical evidence, no scientific evidence behind it. If it makes him feel better, if it works for him, he's going to do it. And so there's that mentality as a professional athlete that you have to tailor everything that you do in your training for you. And I think, and for me personally, there is a lot of sort of, I want to say PTSD for me, but there's a lot of memories associated with it as well. I was a collegiate athlete at the university level, NCAA. And while I was not a professional athlete, when you get to that level, even as a university level, there's a lot of this commitment. There's a lot of this like individual training. Yes, we had weightlifting Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and yes, we had training every day, but there's a lot of unscheduled training that you have to do, or that you should do if you want to be a high performing athlete. And a lot of this brings back memory, the ice baths in particular. I played soccer, so it was like basically full body, half body ice baths like that, where your leg muscles are getting shocked. It was a lot of off training. I remember training on the field, late at night sometimes by myself, kicking the ball around, doing drills, a lot of conditioning, nutrition, all that came into play. So then at the very end, it's this tagline written by the copywriters. It's what you do in the dark that puts you in the light. And I think that just sums up sort of the journey of any athlete, whether professional, university level, any athlete trying to compete and challenge yourself or rule yourself, which was all about conquering sort of your inner self and really, looking inward and challenging yourself, which is, again, in stark contrast to the Nike of finding the greatness in yourself. This is more rule yourself, but, highlighting athletes and how they're doing it. And Michael Phelps is a great example here. I think a really good job. I think this won a Grand Prix in film at Cannes. It won a lot of awards, Clios and stuff like that. I think what it did was it put Under Armour into the conversation when you're talking about the Adidas and the Nikes of the day. And it really allowed them to sort of cement and build credentials in that space. Michael Phelps had been part of Under Armour for many, many years as their assigned athlete, but this was the one real ad that kind of just blew up everything. They hijacked a lot of the Olympic stuff from Nike, so they did a good job on that. And I think it showed the power of having that really strong brand platform and really sticking to it, but then also not being afraid to show the unpolished parts, the real stories and things like that. At the core of it, it's a mini documentary done in a minute and a half, 20 seconds or whatever it is, 90 seconds. But the fact that it's so real and so authentic to his story, at the end of the day, great creative elicits a great emotional response. And that should be the goal of any creative. thanks to everybody. Make sure to like and subscribe so that I continue to show up in the YouTube algorithm. And I will look forward to episode 3 where we react to another ad. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.